Hello, you gorgeous lot. It's Gran here with another episode of Vintage Story from the Rusty Gears server. Now then, I've not been too happy about some choices I've made on my build just of late, and I've looked around very critically at my build, and I felt there was nothing else for it except to make some major changes. And so this episode is all about the changes I've made in this past week or so. And it all kicked off when I was putting up some lanterns at the end of my staircase. Well, I'd just got the last lantern into place at the very top of my staircase. And when I stood back to have a look, it seemed like the lanterns weren't lighting things up. So I took my lantern out of my top left-hand corner, and it was so dark it was as if the lanterns weren't there. I tried a few things, thinking that it was just a glitch and it would rectify itself if I moved things about. But things were not changing. I had no idea what was going on at all. In the end, I took the shades off to leave the lanterns totally free of anything that could obscure the lighting coming out of them. But it was still dark. That was very odd, I thought. Very odd indeed. I ended up taking all the lantern shades off all the lanterns on the bridge as well, because the lighting just wasn't the same. I had to think about that, really. And while I was thinking about it, I turned my attention back to the dome. I'd had a few ideas about it. I'd had an idea of connecting up the top of the pillars with a straight line, and by doing that I'd be able to work on it a little bit more effectively, and I'd be able to see a little bit more what I was doing, because the connections would be easier to make, I thought. So that's what I started working on. And as I was working on it, things were working out a little bit better. And once I'd done the first side, I felt I could see things a lot clearer. It was a lot simpler. And as I progressed, it was looking a lot cleaner. And I could see what I was doing so much better. And I liked the finish. I liked it very much. And with the pantograph, it was easy to transfer around all the sides of the dome. And then to connect this up with the first areas that I'd chiselled, I wanted to incorporate an arch in it. There was a lot of counting going on here. Most of my chiselling involves a lot of counting as I go back and forth between what I've drawn on my piece of paper and what I'm actually doing on my build. But I was finding this a lot easier. And things were connecting where I expected them to. And I was getting quite excited because I felt like I was progressing at last. And when I stood back, it just seemed to fit. It really did fit. Copying these bits around the dome, though, were a little bit tricky. And I needed to use not only my chisel and that twirled things around, but also the wedge tool that actually mirrored them as well. And it took quite a lot of time, and quite a lot of concentration to make sure that I twizzled and mirrored the right ones at the right time. It could be a little bit confusing at times, because of course it wasn't a straight mirroring, because we were going round the dome. But when I'd finished this bit, I was really, really chuffed with how it had come along. And then I needed to carry on making these sections smaller so that they would be easier to work with. So making these straight lines from the middle down to the edges were quite important. And they were quite fiddly as well, because some of the bits that I was transferring only had 2 or 3 voxels in them. I certainly hadn't made it easy for myself. But it was all a huge learning curve, and I was learning loads. And that was another section done. I still had to decide what I was going to put in these sections and how I was going to join up these smaller sections to make the whole. But I'd felt like I'd made a huge stride forward just doing those little bits. Now I needed a nice design to put in each of these segments. Sorting out where it was going to join up as well on each of the pillars was quite easy to do after that, and I was quite chuffed with it. Yeah, it was coming together. It was coming together really well. The next area I just wasn't happy with was the floor. I felt like I was just looking at chalk far too much in the decoration. And I did want something around these lanterns on the wall. And I'd thought that I'd like something in chalk around them. But with all the chalk in the floor, and then thinking about putting chalk on the walls, I felt that it wasn't going to do. It just was not. It was just not going to be what I wanted to see. It really wasn't. I think I might put a lantern here as well, but I would have to pare this area down because it was 2 blocks wide. If I took that back, it would make it 3. I couldn't put one on that side though. I was happy where I'd placed the rest of the lanterns, but this floor was just bugging me. So while the floor bugged me some more, I turned my attention to these panels on this bridge extension just here. And I decided it was about time I did something with them. And I decided it was time to add some more colour. I did a bluebell, and I quite liked it. I didn't want too many different ones, so I thought I'd repeat this a little bit further on. And I also felt that I wanted a bit of a border as well. So with my next one, I thought I'd push it back into the wall, just to give it some depth. And that would serve as a border as well. And I also recessed the actual colours as well, and that gave the image of the flowers some added texture, and I quite liked that. And I wanted a little bit more depth on the border, so I thought I'd just do a little bit more chiselling on the edge to make it look like a bit like a picture frame. And I think that worked out quite well. The lighting though in here wasn't getting any better. I had thought it might miraculously come back, but it was still as dark as ever. And the lanterns were up there. I wondered if I'd got them too high, although I hadn't moved them since I first put them up, and it was lit up okay then. I don't know. So the next flower I chose was a rose, and I felt that turned out quite well. I was quite happy with that. I just wanted to choose one more flower to use here, which would go in both end panels, and I chose an ivy, and that turned out quite well as well. Quite liked all those, and I thought I liked the ivy so much so I decided that was the design I was going to put around the lanterns. So I'd experimented a bit with the lighting and I'd lowered them and it was lighting everything up. So I don't know what changed from when I first put them up to the point when they stopped working. Anyway, I didn't want a white pole hanging from the top of the canopy. It would look too plain. So I'd worked a little bit on something else. I hoped it would look like a chain from the top because there wasn't enough space here to chisel a proper chain. And it didn't look too bad. The most important thing was that everything was lit up again. But I did miss my lantern shades. I quite liked them. They might have been a bit too flowery for some people, but I liked them. So I might try and put them back up again and see if that affects the lighting. But that was something to do later, I think. I noticed my green spire cypress seedlings had grown into trees. And I was really chuffed about that. I didn't think they would. Not there, but they did. Which was fab. And from the outside, they looked really cool. They were quite different in their height though. I thought that was a bit weird. I was going to put some leaves around there as well, so they weren't just going to sit there like that. And just looking into the bridge and seeing the flowers on the wall, I thought they looked absolutely fab. I really liked them. I'm really glad I did those. So I took forward the idea of transferring the ivy pattern onto the walls around the lanterns. I didn't bring any colour with them, I just wanted them in white. And the more I worked on them, the more I felt that the floor was getting in the way. I really did. So I went on and decorated all of the lanterns in the same way, and then felt this floor had to go. The question was, what was I going to replace it with? And I needed to do a little bit of experimenting. So I came up with number 1, which was a diagonal pattern. Just chiselling straight lines on a diagonal. Diagonal again. But I really, really liked that. The other one was a bigger version of the pattern that was already down on the floor. I wasn't quite sure about that. I tried the smaller pattern with some wood inlaid. And this was the bull cypress inlaid. But I didn't like that the grains of the wood all went in the same direction. I tried it with the white chalk inlaid. I still didn't like that. And then I tried it with some walnut inlaid and somehow managed to get the grain of the wood going in different directions, and I quite liked that. I needed to think about it, and while I did, I made another drastic change. I decided these trees, or the beginnings of these trees, would have to go. They just weren't working out for me. And since I found out about the branch cutter, I was longing to use leaves instead. But back to the flooring, and I wanted to have a look at number 1 and number 2 in place. So I used the pantograph and I sorted out a little bit of the floor that I'd like to see it in, just to get a feel for how it looked in the stairway. I quite liked the look, but I wasn't quite sure. I wasn't sure at all. So I tried it again with design number 1 in a different part of the stairway. And I really liked that one. I really did. I liked everything about it. And the fact when you saw it from a different angle, it looked a little bit different. I quite liked that. So I left those two samples in place and went to work on leaves on the outside of each of the windows. I quite liked leaves and the way that they brought little bits of a build to life. And if you've seen any of my Minecraft builds, you'd see that I used a lot of leaves in them. And it just felt that they would naturally be there, you know? With the wind and the rain, the seeds would get caught in the natural crevices around windows and ledges, and bushes and trees would grow. And so it just felt natural that they should have leaves around it instead of a man-made structure. And I quite liked that. Well, I think I'd more or less decided on the flooring I was going to use, but I had another good look at everything else just to make sure. I did like this one. I had inlaid walnut in this one. I might use that somewhere else in the build, but that was one to keep in mind. But it was this one. It was this one that I liked. I liked it quite a lot. This one I felt was a bit too simple. And yeah, I kept going back to this one. And I was quite chuffed that I'd got that grain of the wood to go in different directions. Don't know how I'd done it, mind, but yeah, I like that quite a lot. And I like the colour of the walnut as well. So maybe in one of the bigger rooms of the build above. Yeah. This one, the grain just was the same all the way, no matter how I'd changed it. So I was quite surprised about this. But I'd decided. I'd definitely decided. It was going to be this one. So I started changing the flooring in the stairwell. And I really, really liked it. And I felt it really allowed the decoration around the lanterns to become important and separate from the floor. And I liked that. So this would have to go. It would all be this. It wasn't too difficult changing it either. With a pantograph. And I didn't have to add any more blocks. It was just a matter of transferring it over. And I wanted to see how it looked when you just walked in. Yep, I liked it. I liked it a lot. It just felt right. It just felt like it all went together. And these were major changes I'd made, really. It hadn't taken long to change them. The hardest part was making the decision to change them. But I was glad I did. And I kept looking at things and thinking, were there any doubts creeping in as I was going up and down like before? But there wasn't. I felt like I'd made the right decision to change, and I think it looked a lot better. It really did. Most of the changes were with the pantograph, so it was not really any bother at all. The areas where I needed to do some extra chiselling were by the diagonal areas, by the banisters and on the stairs. But I didn't mind that at all because I knew it was going to be better. I'd used quite a lot of chalk in this floor and that was wasted now, but I wasn't really bothered about that. I wanted it to look right. And the more I was doing, the more I liked it. So that was the main thing. And each time I finished a section, I felt compelled to go down the stairs and come back up again. Just to make sure, you know, just to make sure I felt the same. And I did. It's really difficult when you've changed something. When you've done something and then you don't like it and then you change something. I needed to do underneath the pots as well. Because even though you couldn't see that, I knew it was there. And then in another change of mind, I decided that pot really was a bit in the way. So I decided to take it out. And then I thought, well, maybe I could take that corner out and put the plant pot there. So much indecision. Honestly, I'm like this all the time. And so I carried on changing the floor all the way through the build so far, and it really didn't take me long before I was on the final bit at the top of the staircase. And there I was, at the top. And it was February, it was cold, -3 degrees, and all the trees were frosted, and it looked absolutely gorgeous. I'm hoping I can retain most of this natural terrain up here while I'm building. And I hope I can integrate my build into this like it belongs there. But that remains to be seen. As you've seen, I've been challenged by this build in more ways than one. But I am enjoying the process and I'm learning loads. I had forgotten to put some chalk in there actually. So I did that whilst I was there. And I needed to be very careful that I didn't fall down this hole to my death, because it was a long way down. So I shall start building up here very soon. Yep, I need to get designing. I've got ideas for these walls as well. I'm not going to leave them all blank. But I'm very pleased with how this is looking. Very pleased. I have thought about incorporating some of the furniture that I'm finding with looting, but I'm not quite sure whether it would fit. What do you think? I mean, we're in Vintage Story. Should I be using all Vintage Story stuff? Or should I be chiselling delicate pieces for the build? I'm not quite sure. I'll have to think on that. But yeah. Yeah, I'm pleased with it. I'm really, really tough with that. I'm loving it. You'll have to tell me what you think. I embrace constructive criticism. If there's something you don't like, why don't you like it? And what would you put there in its place? I'd love to hear that from you. So, for the most part, the inside of the stairwell is finished. There's more decorations I'm planning on those plain walls, but I'm not planning any changes to the structure of the staircase now. As for the outside, I did want to do some more leafage, and I wanted to add some of these vines because they look gorgeous, they really do. I needed to place them quite carefully though, because I needed to enhance the windows, and I think that's what it was doing. I quite like the leafage that I put on already. And I think probably some leafage around the doorway. I think that would suit it very well because it needed something green. It needed something more than just the white and the granite. And this leafage is gorgeous and it softens things so well. A bit of greenery does absolute wonders. It really softens edges, and it makes a scene warm and inviting. I try my best to make it look balanced, so for that I put some down at the bottom as well. That's about enough, I think. I like a lot of leafage. Nice. And I'll probably add some more around the bridge off camera. So that's about it for this episode. And before I go, I just want to tell you about a tour of everyone's bases. And that's taking place on Saturday the 4th of May, 7 PM US Central. Quentin from Cupitech is going to be touring, the guy who gave us chisel tools and storage controller, and Shino is going to be streaming it. So that's it for this episode. In the next episode, we're going to be working at the top. Yay, finally! So take care everybody, and I'll see ya in the next episode. Bye bye.